Congratulations on making it to chapter 4. Now that you've got a pretty good idea of how Java works and how it's integrated to Android apps in general, we're going to go on and look at some of the more Android specific features, and specifically in this chapter we're going to look at images and animation, and then sound and all the things we can do with sound with our wonderful Android phones. Before we do that, however, we're going to take a little side journey into seeing how we lay out our objects and our views on the app, because this is something we're going to be doing again and again, and it's a good idea to have at least a basic idea of how all the different layouts and everything fit together. So this is our Number Shapes app from the previous section. I'm just going to move on from that and create a new project which I'll call Layout Demo. Here we go. So here's our new app, and we've got our main activity and we're in design mode. Now, the first thing I want to bring your attention to is something we've seen before. It's the component tree. We're going to look at this in a bit more detail now. So every component tree has the device screen quite obviously at the top of the tree. So that's obviously where everything will be based. And then within that, you normally have a relative layout. So on the left here, scroll up to the top if you can't see them, you've got various different types of layout, some of which we're going to look at in a minute. But by default in a new app, you have a full screen relative layout. Now relative means that we're laying out our views. Those are our buttons, our text views, checkboxes, text fields, anything that we might put on the screen is a view. And we'll be laying them out relative to other objects which already exist, like this hello world, and relative to the edges of the screen, the center of the screen, those sort of places. So if you grab a button and then drag it onto the screen, we're now going to look at the messages that we get in a little bit more detail. Unfortunately, I'm getting a black line through mine, which isn't great, but we should be able to work with it. So if, for example, I wanted it centered horizontally and vertically, if I move it there, you can see the screen, or Android Studio at least, predicts that if I want it there, probably I want my button in exactly the center of the screen, horizontally and vertically. And that means no matter what the screen size is, so whether we're on a tablet or phone or whatever, this is going to be centered right in the middle. So that's a really useful position to start with. Let's just undo that. So I just press Command Z to get rid of my button. Now let's have another look. What about if I drag it down to the top left here? So you can just about see we've got two options there, align parent left and align parent bottom. So the parent is this relative layout up here. That's the thing that we're putting our button into, and by putting it down here, the program thinks that we want to align it to the left edge of the parent, so the left edge to the relative layout, and the bottom of the parent, so that is the bottom edge of the relative layout again. So if I put that there, then it's aligned relative to the relative layout. So again, any screen size, that's going to be in the bottom left. Let's see how else I can set things up. So if I go up here, for example, now we're aligning to the parent left, so that's our horizontal alignment. Our vertical alignment is below, and it says generated there. So it's below the generated element, i.e. this hello world element. So this is actually aligning to the bottom of the hello world element. So we can align things relative to other elements as well. Let's see what else we can do. Now here, if I drag it where there's not much else of interest, you can see it now thinks that I want to align it relative to the right of the parent with a margin of 202 dps. So that would be 202 pixels from the right edge of the parent, as you can see that green arrow there. And on the vertical alignment, it's saying below generated. So we're looking at 98 pixels below that hello world option, the hello world element of view. And then as I go down, it then decides, maybe he wants vertical centering. And down here, maybe he wants relative to the right or the bottom of the screen, etc. So have a good play around and you can see what are the default options you get. Obviously, you might want to, let's say you want to put it here, but then you want to actually align it relative to the screen, not the label. Well, what we'll do to see what the difference there is, we'll add another button in, and this one we will align relative to the parent. So let's say align parent left and then parent bottom. So we've got button and button 2 there. Now I'm going to show you something that we haven't spent any time on, but you might have looked in yourself, this text view here. So the design view is a nice visual representation of what your app is going to look like on this size screen. But when it comes down to it, it's actually stored in this text here. So here's our text that creates that first button that I added, and here's the text that creates the second button that I added. So when you get super advanced with Android, you might decide, oh, I don't need this design view anymore. I'm going to just use the text view and just write out the code for your button rather than drag it in. And that of course gives you certain power. You don't have to rely on where the design view thinks you want to put your button. You can actually just type it in directly. So if you're the sort of person that likes using code rather than drag and drop tools, then this will be great for you. It also shows us what settings each of our buttons have taken. So for example, we can see the width is wrap content. So the width is relative to the content of the button. So that means it'll get wider if I make the title of the button longer. Now we know that we can change that over here, as we've done a few times before. We can change it to match parent, for example. And then that will change the width of the button to the width of the parent. And now we know the width of the parent is the width of the relative layout. So that's how we change our button. And then if we go and have a look at the text, now you can see this one's changed to match parent. And we can do the same here. We don't have to use the drop-down menus in the design view. We could just change the text here. So if I want to change the height of that button, this is going to be a disaster, but I can change the height of that first button to match parent and then have a look at the design view, and it's changed the height of that button. It looks really weird. So I'm just going to change that back. But there we go. So now you can see that if you've added a button and you want to change any of the parameters, this is probably the best place to do it. So this one, for example, the second button, we're aligning to the parent bottom and we're aligning to the parent left. So that's what we decided. And aligning to the parent start being true means we're putting it exactly at the left of the relative layout. And this 57 dps means that we're 57 pixels from the bottom. So that I think all makes sense. This one up here, the previous one that we added, we are aligning to the parent left. So that means, and we've got aligned to parent start as well. So that means it's going to be at the very left of the screen, as we can see over here. But we're actually aligning vertically below the text view. So this object up here, the one that was there originally that has this ID of text view. And the margin at the top, so the margin between the text view and our button, is 70 pixels. So that's how the text or the code relates to the design view. And you can very much decide whether you want to be a drag and drop kind of developer or whether you want to just write code to create your objects. Generally speaking, this is a bit more powerful, but when you're just putting together quick apps, this is much, much quicker. So this is definitely the view that we're going to be spending the most time in during this course. So that's how you, generally speaking, work with layouts. I just want to show you a few of these other layouts that we can have. So everything that we've done so far has been with relative layouts, but a particularly useful one is this horizontal linear layout. So to tell you why I think we might want this is, let's say we want to have two buttons which are put centrally but next to each other. So neither of them are quite centered, but if you imagine they're both kind of mirrored along the center line. Now with a relative layout, that's quite a difficult thing to do. But what we can do is bring in a horizontal linear layout, and then we could put that layout, for example, right in the middle of the screen. If I can find the right position, there we go. So the layout is now centered, and I can then take my buttons and drag them into that layout. So I could either do it over here or I could drag it up here. And then my button appears within my linear layout. So that's now added that at the top left. Let's just get rid of those ones. So I just right click there and delete, so we can only see the one that we're interested in. So there's our linear layout. If I then try and drag another button into there, you'll see I can't drag it just anywhere. And what I'm definitely encouraged to do is drag it next to the existing button. So that is what a linear layout is. The idea is that you have lots and lots of objects in a line horizontally. And if you want to have a vertical one, then you've got a vertical option there as well. So now if I want to center these, then I can change the width of my linear layout to wrap content, and that will then become the width of the buttons. And that will mean that the two buttons are centered together in the screen. So that's a quite common use case, that you might want an OK and a cancel button or something like that, and you might want them both to be centered together. And then if we change the height to wrap content as well, then what we've got is our linear layout centered in the middle of the screen with our two buttons inside our linear layout. So I really like that setup. It makes it really quite easy to create any kind of relative layout that you might want. So the other layouts are not so important. I'm not going to go into those now. You can read about them if you like. Feel free to play about with them as well. But that's hopefully just giving you a bit of an introduction as to, firstly, how the relative layout and other types of layout allow you to create pretty much any layout for your app, and also how the visual layout actually is stored in the app with code, and that allows you to have other, perhaps more precise ways of defining your views, so your buttons and your text fields, etc., by working on the code itself. If you're wondering what language this is, by the way, this is XML, which is a very widely used language for storing information like this. And we'll definitely see XML again later on in the course. So that's how we work with our layouts. We'll be seeing this again and again as we create our apps in the rest of the course. In the next video, we're going to go on and create a simple animation. See you there.